My name is Jeon. I'm the director for the Center for Critical Korean Studies at UCI. You've all just watched Minari, a beautiful film. I have with me here, I'm really fortunate and delighted to have Chung, the director, and Christina the producer of the film. And so we have a Q&A session set up, and let's just get started. I guess we'll start with you, Isaac. Normally, I would ask you, a filmmaker, how this project came about, but this is clearly a deeply personal project and a passion project. It's the story, I think, of your life. So I'm curious just to hear you talk about how this went from being your life to being a movie, and
Mm,
at what point did you think this was a film, and how did it kind of come together?
yeah, thanks, Joe, for having us for this. This is really a great honor. Um, to answer your question, um, I thought about this film from the very beginning when I first thought about making movies, and I went to film school, and I had a screenwriting professor who would tell me all the time, you should start writing something about your family, or you should start writing about something from you growing up. Because he thought it was interesting that I grew up in Arkansas. And I think a lot of people thought that it was interesting. And somehow I thought it wasn't interesting. I wasn't sure, how do you explain that your parents were chicken sexers? How do you explain all these, random little details? Um, and I kind of put that aside for a long time. And I was making films in other places. Like I made a film in Rwanda. I made a documentary in China.
I have it right
Um,
here.
That's right.
Yeah.
Hey, wow, you have that.
Yeah.
And I just found myself more interested in going to a place and being an outsider and exploring other stories. And it wasn't until maybe 2018 I started to think that maybe I might have to move on, that I might have to just get full-time job somewhere and stop trying to make movies, because it's really taking a lot out of our family. And obviously my career wasn't going the way that I wanted. So I kind of gave myself a few months to write one last script, and I was going to start teaching once that was done. And I had gotten a job offer in Korea. So that was kind of where I was in life. Um, I, I had various options for what I might write for the last one, but I knew that I needed to do something that I would completely regret if I never did.
Mm.
And to me, it felt like it had to be personal. And my daughter was turning like 6 at the time, and I realized I was the age that my dad was when he moved us to that farm in Arkansas. And something about that timing felt right, that I could tell a story about what it must have been like for my dad to move to Arkansas and to bring along his kids, who are basically the age of my daughter. And I started to remember back to that time and started to write down a lot of memories. And once I wrote down around 80 memories, they were just flowing out. I started to see the semblance of a story, and I thought, wow, this might be able to be an interesting film. Because I think the first thing I wrote was, when we went to that farm, I realized as a kid that my mom had no idea that my dad had decided to do this. And that was kind of this weird shock to me as a kid, like, oh, my mom had no idea that my dad, bought this trailer home in this farm. And I remember those first days, my sister and I are trying to convince my mom, hey, this is kind of a cool thing. This house has wheels. This is kind of neat. And so that to me seemed like a good opening to a movie, that you start off with this family moving someplace, and the mother had no idea that this was going to happen. And I remembered a lot of other things, because it was quite a tumultuous time as we tried to start a farm. And the most important thing was I remember the Minari patch that my grandmother planted. And once that came into my mind, it was almost immediate, like, Minari, that's the name of the film. And it's going to end at a Minari patch. Then I just started working on the script, and luckily met Christina less than a year since I started writing. And then less than a year after meeting her, we already made the film and premiered it at Sundance. So it moved really quickly once the script was written.
Oh, well, it's a good chance to bring Christina into this conversation. First of all, let me say that you've been a producer for a few films that I really love. I loved Okja and I loved Last Black Man in San Francisco, both of
Oh,
which are
thank you.
fantastic films.
Thank
So I'm curious how you first heard about the project, what drew you to it, and how did you become involved?
if I can go back a little bit because I had on Okja met Steven, and I think for for me, for being this younger Korean American producer at the time, like when we met, I remember it was the first time we met at dinner at like a paella place that director Bong really liked. It was like around the corner from the office in Korea, and we kind of were just talking, and for the first time, weirdly, for the first time in my life, and I'm in my like 20s at that point, like being like, whoa, I've actually never like talked to somebody about what it's like growing up to being like super Korean American, because I just didn't really have anyone to really talk about that kind of stuff with. And it just was like this weird moment of like, whoa, like you feel that too, or you've been through stuff like that, or you grew up that way. And it was a really weird moment for me. And I think like we kind of started a friendship at that point. And that movie itself was just, it brought a lot of people together. Then, flash forward a couple of years and, we're closer friends now, and we're hanging out one day and he mentioned this script. And between that time, kind of, I'd been sent a lot, after Okja, just like a lot of Asian material. And I think I was very resistant for a while. I was like, I don't want to be like a producer that just makes Asian things because I'm Asian. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I just wasn't, I think for me, I was like, I don't know every sort of Asian thing, so I don't feel it wouldn't be authentic for me to be at the helm of that. But I think when I was talking to Steven, he like mentioned this script and I was just like, oh, super intrigued. And he ended up sending it to me, and Isaac's reps actually the same day, like sent it to me. So I read it, and for the first time, I felt like I was reading a story where I really understood and knew the characters from a personal standpoint. Like my parents immigrated to America from South Korea in the early 80s. I didn't grow up on a farm, but a lot of the emotionality and the sort of in the story and a lot of the humanity on display was something that I was immediately drawn to in that aspect. And I think, it's testament to Isaac's like brilliant writing, I think, in that regard. I remember just being kind of floored and moved and like, tearing up at these points, and the moments where like the parents are arguing, and it also like gave me a newfound understanding of like what our parents might have gone through at that time. So in that regard, it really resonated with me, and I was, excited to chat with him. And then we started talking, and it moved very quickly. Like from the time I read it to the time we wrapped production, I think it was like 6 months. Maybe, yeah, 6 months.
So this is a question for Isaac. I'm just generally curious, given it's a story about your childhood, if you took any liberties with that story, if this is a pretty accurate, rendition of what you remember. And then secondly, just to think about, I'm curious about the decision. It seems like the film is large. I mean, I know that the children play an important role, but the story is largely centered around the parents, Jacob and is it? Oh, I forgot.
Monica.
Monica, thank you.
Yeah.
I guess I'm curious why, if that was an intentional decision, and how you approach the problem of representing this story or telling the story somewhat through the point of view of your parents.
Sure. I mean, I don't necessarily think of this as my life story, if that makes sense. Because with any work, I feel like what happens when you are writing fiction in a way, or creating a story, you have to take liberties, and you can't, or I can't just write down what happened, because a lot of those details, they just don't amount to an actual narrative that works. I felt like, for me, I needed to liberate myself in a way from trying to create a memoir. So I tried very hard to make sure that these characters were not my family. even though the things that they go through, they do draw heavily from memories and things that I have gone through. So yeah, I could watch the movie with you and point out, well, this is what happened, this is what really happened, and I could do that. I think it would be incredibly boring for people if I ever did something like that, and it would not be illuminating at all. Because my hope was that this family would feel like they exist on their own, and that they're not somehow tied to me or tied to reality, but they're existing in this movie space. And that was the principle that I worked with a lot with it. And marriage, I'm glad you brought that up, because that to me was a big part of the story. Like in my view, when I think back on my parents' experience, maybe the most traumatic thing that happens is the way that immigration affects a marriage. And I actually think it might be a healthy thing. I think it might be a good thing. In Korea, there are very strong gender roles at that time in the 1970s and 80s. And for instance, like my mother was never allowed to drive in Korea. She was never allowed to have any understanding of what's going on in the household finances. She never had a say in those things. But when Korean immigrants come to the US, suddenly the husband and wife are on more equal terms, or there's an opportunity for them to be on more equal terms. And it was a big deal. I remember when my mom was learning to drive, and that stands out to me from our childhood. But that to me is kind of the spirit of this film, the way that a marriage is being reshaped and that a new identity is being created inside of a marriage, inside of a relationship between these two. That's not Korea, that's not America, but it's really specific to this family. So that was important for me as I was writing.
That leads me to a question I have about casting. This film is so beautifully cast, and the actors just fit perfectly together. And I'm thinking, as you're talking about, the gender dynamics between your parents, I was also thinking about the on-stage dynamic between Stephen Yoon and Hedy Yerihan, which I thought was just beautiful, and they seem to kind of balance each other out perfectly. I wonder if you could just talk about the casting process and how you settled on these actors. And I guess I have even another question specific. I'll just throw it in there, and you can just sort of talk about the casting in general. But I loved Yoon Yoo-jung and Will Patton. I thought were not just perfectly cast, but they were perfectly cast in sort of the same but diametrically opposed way. They really brought a sense of like the film was both really deeply rooted in a deeply Korean sensibility and then a very distinctive regional American sensibility. And I thought those two actors had a lot to do with that rooting. They're both very famous actors in their own right, but obviously coming from different traditions. So I guess if you could, the both of you, if you could just talk about how you cast the movie and how you try to make your decisions. And it obviously turned out really well.
Yeah, thank you very much. Christina, you want to start, or you?
Well, obviously, I think when Isaac and I were talking a lot initially, it was really important to cast this in the most authentic way possible, and with people who are truly could speak the language. So if in the story, if they're immigrants, they obviously immigrated from Korea, their Korean should be impeccable. And I think for people who are truly bilingual, casting somebody who didn't have Korean as their native language, it would have been really obvious. Stephen thankfully is truly bilingual, and he worked on his Korean up until we were shooting, and it's really great. And then when it came to Monica and Sunja, who plays the Halmoni role, we were like, what do we do? And I think Isaac at the time was teaching in Korea, and his good friend Ina Lee had brought at least YJ up, Yoon Sensengnim, and she is friends with her, so she kind of like brought her into the mix and shared Isaac's script with her, and she was really moved by Isaac's words. And Isaac has a great story about how she decided to take the role, which I will let him tell you about.
Yeah, all I know is that she read halfway through the script, and she just called up Ina and said, "Is this real? Did this really happen?" And Ina said, "Yes." And YJ just said, "Okay, I'll do it." Apparently, that's how the conversation went.
I mean, we're obviously truly blessed to have such amazing cast members such as YJ and Yeti, who was also equally amazing. I mean, she carries a lot of that sort of marital relationship on her shoulders with this great strength and silence.
Yeah.
And then Will was somebody that Isaac had worked with before, and I mean, that was like a no-brainer. He was like, "I think we should cast Will," and I was like, "Done, sure, let's make sure we're on schedule."
Yeah, and what Christina said about Yeti having strength, I felt like both Steven and Yeti have this deep strength to them. That's maybe the first word I would use to describe both of them. So the fact that we cast Steven, I just knew we needed to have somebody who can balance that, and for me that was Yeti. Of all the actresses that I was looking at and thinking about, I just could see those two hitting it off in this way and creating this dynamic that creates some synergy. And with Will and YJ, I love that you compare them. One of my favorite moments on set was when we had that day where we're filming the dinner scene and they're together in a scene. And I remember in my mind, I kept thinking, this is Will Patton and Yoon Jung in a scene together. Like, when has this ever, who would have predicted this would ever happen? And to me, they are kind of doing a similar thing in the film. They're kind of the unsuspecting sources of wisdom in the movie. And so I loved working with them both. It was amazing.
Well, I have to ask you about that scene where Paul is dragging the cross down the street. Can you just talk about that? Where the idea came from? It's such a beautiful, surprising, strange moment that,
that's the thing. I grew up in a town where this sort of thing happens. So people talk about how strange that is, but I saw it every week.
I was like, I don't think that was an idea. I think that was just I think putting true events into the story.
No, yeah, we did have a man who worked on our farm, and he's lovely guy named Clark, and he was an ex-convict, and he kind of started a new life out in Arkansas. And one of the things he would like to do is carry a cross around on the weekends. And I just remember that was just a fixture in our town, and everybody knew that that's what he does. And that's kind of what he was known for. So that came to mind as I was writing this, that I thought it'd be great if we did that. And if Will Patton specifically could do that. And a credit to him, when Jeon, our production designer, was designing the cross, like, she offered him a styrofoam light cross, and he got very upset. He said, "No, it's supposed to be heavy." And and he would drag it around any place where we're about to film. If it's half a mile away, he would do the walk with it, because he said, "No, I got to do it. It's my cross," and he would do it. So yeah, he's just that kind of guy.
I guess one of the things I love about the scene is one of the things I love about the film in general is that, I mean, it seems like an opportunity for a kind of, I don't know, some kind of message or something or another, but it ends up just being a guy dragging a cross down the street, like there's a weird way. I mean, like, it's like screams of symbolism, but then just kind of just lets it be what it is. And I guess it reminds me of another scene that I really loved from the film. It's at the church. I guess they're both about religion in some ways, but the white characters, the members of the congregation, and specifically thinking about the kids, they're kind of rehearsing some stereotypes, and the one girl's like, "Oh, I'm going to make some Asian noises, like, stop me when I say something in your language." And, like, as an Asian American, Korean American growing up in the US, being exposed to that sort of thing, my hackles get raised for a moment. But there's still a kind of innocence about that scene. It's clear that they're, like, just trying to get to know each other, and that's just the language in which they're trying to do it. I guess I'm just curious about how you handled that scene and how you thought about, those kinds of moments in your film.
I guess the whole film rests upon a childlike perspective in a way, and that's David is kind of giving us a window into this story. And I felt like the issue of identity and racism and the tension that might happen with this family in Arkansas, I felt like it has to come up. If it doesn't come up, then that would be strange and that would feel unnatural. But I was more interested in, if it does come up, how do we do it in a way that adds to the conversation? And that's what I was interested in. I felt like a lot of the experiences I had in Arkansas were like that. And of course, I had bad experiences, and I'm sure you have. I'm sure a lot of people watching this have. But in general, there's also, I don't know, just a friction that happens when cultures are colliding a bit, and it's a maybe not a bad friction. Maybe we're just learning badly. We're just learning through these like frictions, and that's a good thing. So I wanted to show that positive side in a way, or the more optimistic side, while not ignoring it entirely. And I thought that would be more additive.
It's interesting you bring that scene up, actually, because that's one of the scenes that Stephen and I initially talked about before I even read the script. He brought that specific scene where he was like, we got into talking about how it didn't like victimize us as Koreans. It was more like, this is just how it was, and it's shedding a little light on how kids interact when they encounter somebody from a different culture, and it's from this sort of place of ignorance and just not knowing versus like a place of like, racism or cruelty. So that was another moment where I was really just kind of moved by the way Isaac handles some of this material in the script.
I did want to definitely ask about the kids, because they, I think some of the, adult actors should be a little angry at them because they nearly steal the show at certain points. They're really, really wonderful. I wonder if you could just talk about finding them, casting them, and then also what it was like to work with them.
Yeah, that was fun. Christina and I, we were together a lot for that whole process, because we did it at her office. We had Julia Kim, who was our casting director, was bringing in lots of kids for auditions. We had so many tapes being sent to us, and these were all non-professionals, so kids who had never acted before. And Alan, he sent in his audition. It was his first time to go for a film role. I think he had done some Pottery Barn ads and some other advertisements, but this was his first attempt at going into film, and he was the youngest of all the entrants. And he stood out from everybody, and we brought him down, and he did some readings with Stephen at the office, and they were really magical and wonderful. And then Noelle, I remember she sent us a note about how she loves Emma Watson, and she wants to be an actress one day. Do you remember that, Christina?
I don't fully remember that, but also I think by the time Isaac and I we had seen 100 kids for each role, and that's just what got to us. Our casting director Julia just did some really interesting grassroots sort of casting, not just going to agencies and stuff, but also going to Korean churches and after school programs and into K-Town and posting flyers. And she'd call me on the weekend being like, I'm at some Korean center in the heart of LA, K-Town, LA. And I'd just be like, amazing. And I think that's how, we were getting submissions also from Korea. So it was really just a thorough search. And the thing that I always was bringing up to Isaac was I don't know, David does some kind of bratty things, and you just want to have so much love for that character. So even if he does some of the stuff, you understand why he's doing it, or you can still dote on him afterwards, which I think he just plays that so well with YJ, especially after a certain scene.
I just love just the just a little detail, just the Mountain Dew, how that was like Chekhov's gun. It functions as Chekhov's gun. You see it early, and then it's used in evil ways. Um,
That, one of the questions that we kept asking each other was, if he feeds somebody pee, would we hate him? That's during the casting. That's what we would always ask with every kid.
Yeah, that was
this kid.
Our
Yeah.
barometer.
Like, oh, we wouldn't forgive this kid. Like, this,
Nope.
okay, we can't.
that's a good litmus test. That's a really good litmus test. Okay, so I guess I want to ask about, I'm sure you're aware of the controversy about the Golden Globes, and I just, so for those of you listening out there that don't know, it was categorized as entered in the best foreign language film category, and there's been a lot of controversy about it. I wonder if you guys could just talk about that a little bit and how you think about that.
That's a tough one. I give the tough ones to Christina.
Thanks, Isaac. Yeah, so look, I think we had to operate based on their rules, and their ruling is like, if a film is more than 60% in another language, then it categorizes it as foreign language. I think to anyone who's seen the film, it's not a foreign film, at least in America. It's a very American story. And I think for us, at least, we're obviously a little disappointed when we heard that, but at the same time, at least for me, like, if this is what progresses the narrative, and if this is what gets them to reevaluate their rules, or other people to reevaluate certain antiquated, things, systems, then, I'm really proud of that. And that's kind of like something that I can hold on to. And that if this film plays that role, and helping them readdress or change that, then that's great, but it's their rule, so we had to follow them. But hopefully it progresses that conversation forward.
That's a very politic answer, but I just want you to know that a lot of us are very, very frustrated.
I appreciate it. I
understand
your
the upset. Yeah.
Totally understand.
I know that. I know why people are upset, for sure.
I mean, if to anyone watching, it is probably like, has some of, if you could like talk about America, that's essentially what this film is doing. Like, I hope that people watch it and feel that, wow, this is like just another part of America, or another just slice of America that I've never seen, but is very much embodies what America was founded upon.
Yeah, I agree. So hopefully that will change, and as we go past that particular award season. And I realize that artists don't make films and art for awards, so that's a whole separate category of concerns. For Isaac, I recently just coincidentally sat down with Bong for a totally different project that I'm working on. And I also saw that interview that you had with him in the video that I think it was in Variety.
Yeah.
And while we were talking, it was just pretty recently after that Variety interview, and we talked about your film, and it was clear that it was still in his mind. And I know Christina, obviously, you've worked with him as well. I'm just curious. I guess I have a larger question about. I just have a small question about what that experience was like and what that conversation was like, but also within a larger question of, have you had any feedback from Korean audiences? Yet? Do you have a sense of how? I realize the film is not officially released for another week or so, but do you have any sense of how it's being received in Korea?
First of all, with the Bong Joon-ho thing, that was an incredible honor for me to be talking with him, and that he paid so much attention to the film, and I felt seen by that. That's always going to be a highlight for me, that conversation we had. And I was worried because I spoke in English to him and he spoke back in Korean, and I thought, is this going to be weird for people to watch? But somehow with subtitles, I thought, oh, this actually works. And it was fun to be able to even show that sort of way that Koreans might communicate with each other. But I kind of get a sense of how the film is being perceived in Korea because my mom and dad, they Google our Korean press nonstop. They're sending me
So
so many
much.
articles.
So much. I know more about how it's being received in Korea than I feel like America, because my parents like text nonstop.
Yours too, huh?
And
Mine are like reading comments, you know, the comments of articles. I'm like, don't read the comments, mom and dad.
my mom also loves to send me like pirated links. Like this movie's like, I don't know, she likes just policing everything.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm getting the sense that it is positive, and I think there is a lot of excitement about how this film is also getting attention for Yoon Jung. And I think there's been a newfound, I don't know, a lot of people really enjoying that and glad that she's being celebrated here. So I don't know, overall I'd say positive, and hopefully the release will go well in a month.
Is it released slightly later in Korea? Is that
Slightly later, maybe in March, is that right?
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And this is just a last question I have. This is we have a lot of students, a lot of young people that are listening to this. And I'm curious, just what advice would you give, not just to filmmakers, but I guess storytellers in general that want to tell their own stories?
Well, I guess one of the things I often say is to basically try to get anchored in some way. Try not to let your whole identity be wrapped up in this, in trying to make films and stuff. And that's a mistake I made in my own life. And I feel like if you get anchored into the things that matter, into your families, into your communities, into the people around you, your friends, then I think it'll help you make films. It'll help you to see why we need to make films, and it'll help give you something to say. And that's really the most important thing, that you have something to say. So that might be my advice, and just to enjoy it, because it's fun to tell stories. So I hope people will enjoy it too.
I think that's some beautiful advice, Isaac.
Christine, do you want to add anything in terms of?
Yeah, I'm curious.
I mean, slightly, a wider range, but. What do you want to say to the young people? This is your opportunity.
I was like, what am I going to say? I don't know. You know what? I really, as cheesy as it is, like, if you really believe something, just go for it. I'm a weird kid from Massachusetts, a small town in Massachusetts. I never thought I would be producing movies today. And somewhere along the way, I discovered it and fell in love with it and fought for it, kind of a little bit to the chagrin of my parents, who thought I was going to be a doctor. I really kind of stuck with it. And another person gave me some great piece of advice, was, if you feel like you're going to die if you don't make it, then go for it. And that's like kind of, how I've picked my projects, and it's really like grounded me at some point. Also, like, kind of figure out what you want to do, and it's okay if it takes a little bit of time, and go to therapy.
That's the most important.
That's important.
Therapy. Well, Isaac and Christina, thank you so much. Congratulations on a really, really remarkable film. It was really, really moving.
Thank you.
Again, not that the awards are the point, but I expect big things from it. So best of luck in all of that. And thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, this means a lot. Thank you so much, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
My pleasure. My pleasure.